hear me at the back there okay? Now, I'm not a designer or a typographer, but Anutin asked me to speak generally about Thai culture because I've been writing about it for half of my life. And so I'm going to provide a little bit of a context about how typography relates to different structures and situations in Thailand, because it can have quite an impact on the social context of things. Now, many years ago, I brought out a book that's become quite influential about Thai popular culture, about the things that you find in the street and in the home and in everyday life. And a lot of people ask me, why did I make the title font just a plain typewriter font rather than something that looks like the subject? And the reason is because if I make it look another way, I start to have allegiance with one or more groups in Thailand, and I was trying to be the neutral outsider, insider that I am. If it had had any of these other kinds of effects in the giving a kind of Thai feeling, or rather trying too hard with this font that's using elements of Thai script in Western script, it would look a little bit like I'm trying to ingratiate myself or pander to Thai culture, or even pretend that I'm Thai in some way. Now, at that time, there was a lot of books about Thailand, but they were all flattening out the culture into a very minimalist kind of generic style. Meanwhile, Thailand itself was presenting itself in a kind of exoticized, almost Orientalist way, auto-Orientalism in a way, showing itself in a kind of fantasy mode, whereas my particular take was really realist. Now, realism doesn't go down terribly well in Thailand. Anyone who's worked in the culture here finds that people bristle at it, but the culture itself is colorful enough that the subject matter speaks for itself, and I don't need to present myself as being this is exotic or this is Asian. It's just real. One style that I had been tempted by is retro, which is a general trend around the world. And in Thailand, it had a particular role because a lot of the subject matter I was writing about came about in that mid-20th century to late 20th century period when a lot of foreign things came into Thailand and were localized. And looking back at that, it seems like a simpler age, a bit of a golden age to many Thais. And so if I was to use that kind of font, I'd be aligning myself with a slightly nostalgic take on Thainess, which I was not looking to do, because retro can have a sense of patriotism about it. Now, the designer of this font, Tirapapa, he has a couple of brands. One was Siam Rue, or Thai Wealth, and another one is Chonabot. It's all about things from Thailand that give a sense of warm, fuzzy Thainess. And he asserts that these fonts can give a sense of national uniqueness, or that they indicate Thainess. And a lot of people have issues about the definition of Thainess. And so in many ways, it's a pitfall to try and fall into that. If you're an observer, you start to look like somebody who's taking a side. Now, at that time, there were a lot of patriotic fonts around, a lot of patriotic movies, a lot of nationalism in the post-1997 crisis period. This one here for a movie about national defenders a couple of centuries ago called Bang Rajan looks like blades or swords. In fact, this is not the only time you're going to see a head being cut off in this talk. There will be other examples later. Now, perhaps the most famous font from that period was Far Talai Joan, which was associated with this famous movie of that period, about 20, 25 years ago. And it's an interesting case because you might have heard about musicians around the world getting angry that their songs have been used at political rallies from politicians they disagree with. Well, in Thailand, there was a case of this with typography. A group of red shirt protesters, after a coup, I think it was, had started using this font, Fartalai Joan, in their communications. And the designer, Rotsuum Roy, he was furious at this because he was from the other side of the political fence. He'd made the font free to use, so he couldn't really do anything about it, but he demanded that they stop using it. So we do get a sense that typography fits along a political spectrum in Thailand, left, right. And in fact, the red shirts find themselves rather in the middle now. And on the right side, you've got designers who, in this particular magazine, refer to themselves as type designers who fell in love with Thainess. So you've got an allegiance going on there. And on the left side, you've got representations of the youth protest movement that has become mainstream now. And to some degree, you could say they have become disenchanted with at least official Thainess, not with Thai things generally, but at least with Thainess that's pushed from above. Now, we did have a little bit of an overlap with a talk yesterday relating to the mob type book, and I've got a couple of examples of that here, which the people who weren't at that discussion can start to see, and also a discussion about the political party typefaces. These are arranged pretty much left to right. It's a bit approximate because there's not really a hard and fast ideology in Thailand. But we can see that on the right-hand side, the typefaces tend to use more curves and more loops. And on the left, the typefaces are much harsher and sharper and angular without loops, and they've got more pop colors instead of Thai flag colors. Now, the big outlier here is the biggest government party in the middle, Pheu Thai, which recently changed its font from being from being sort of heavily bladed like a sword to being looped. And here we can see how that had progressed over recent years. In fact, the change happened a bit before with a sub-party that they'd put into the 2019 election, which started to use loops in terms of courting a more middle-of-the-road audience than their previous allegiance. Now, there's an interesting aspect to this change, which shows the Thainess of it. Apparently, there had been a fortune teller saying that to cut the head off the loops was very inauspicious. Now, fortune tellers have a very, very big role historically in Thailand, giving the timing for coups and all kinds of business decisions. So this actually represents a strong theme in Thailand, and sure enough, there are some fortune-telling fonts as well. There are various manuals about fortune-telling in Thailand that have this kind of imagery with rather magical Thai-style imagery that's got a lot of descriptive, decorative elements. And on the left, we find one of the pages inside showing how there's a version of Khmer font, which is locally called Kom, that's used in these Kabbalistic diagrams, along with a lot of illustrations of his, sacred figures. And we see this throughout life. You'll see it in taxis, on the fronts of buildings. You'll see it tattooed onto bodies. And they contain spells, they contain blessings. It's very sacred. But the use of the Khmer font gives a little bit of distance. So there's a way in which the mainstream can feel, well, we believe this, but it's not actually completely Thai. It's something a bit else. It's Khmer magic or something. It's a way of handling the slightly delicate matter of the supernatural in Thailand. Now, there's quite an interesting case of a company, which was the telecom company Orange, about 20 years ago, decided to try and make its push-button keypad in the days of pre-screen mobile phones with the Thai script, how to organize it with all those extra letters. So what they did was they arranged the keypad according to the stroke shape of the initial, when you're writing the letter, to try and impose that with the vowels being above, below, in front or behind. It was a very clever kind of design that failed completely and never took off. But it is interesting how this was incorporating something to do with Thai magic into a mobile phone. Of course, anything in Thailand to do with design involves the use of color and all the significance of that. Each day of the week has an indic color associated with it, and this can also have political implications because the day of the week that the king was born on Monday is yellow, and that led to the yellow shirts on the right side of Thai politics adopting that color. So we went through a period about 15 years when it was quite awkward what color scheme you would use because it could show your allegiance one way or another. And pink became involved in this as well, and so did powder blue. So we've ended up with some color combinations being really quite difficult. So you need to be cautious if you're presenting to a Thai audience. A certain color scheme in a logo or a promotion might ally with one side or other. Now we see a lot of these factors come together in the way the government presents itself. One of those is presenting itself as sacred, presenting itself in a very exotic way. It's often color-themed and very delicately beautiful, self-consciously delicate, and also with a preponderance of looped typefaces showing the traditional outlook. Now, it's extraordinary that on the right here, this logo was for the Ministry of the Digital Economy and Society. Now, they needed to update this because the folding book that you would inscribe made out of palm leaf wasn't exactly digital. So they updated it, they kept the loops, but gave this deity a Wi-Fi signal in his magic finger. So, I mean, he's here with us today, so you can plug your phone into the official Wi-Fi. Now, this takes us back to some questions about whether you loop or don't loop in Thai culture. And if you go very far back, when writing was carved in stone, you couldn't loop, it all had to be angular, and there weren't really loops in the script. Later on, when people were inscribing in palm leaf books, in order not to split the palm leaf, you would then etch in using curves. And then later on, as penmanship came in, you'd find loops and florid swoops and all this kind of stuff would be much more common. So when people are talking about loops as being Thai style, it's really only a period from, say, Mid-Ayutthaya until recent times. But we can see how some of these styles have been replicated. The logo for Muang Baran, which is the ancient city site in suburban Bangkok, which is also a publishing house of historical books, they use this stone typeface. We've seen the fortune-telling style using this early inscription feel. And then handwriting itself is quite interesting because very often it completely omits the loops and it becomes quite cursive. Now, there are handwriting fonts that are used in daily life in Thailand, and oh, I need power to this computer. Does anyone have a power? It's going to be running out. Sorry about this. Yes, so basically, handwriting is generally pretty unlooped. Now, if we go to the early days of printing, in fact, printing came from outside, and the first fonts came from outside. They were used by missionaries, and the first book was, in fact, a prayer book for Christians. And early books like dictionaries and newspapers were all using a very spindly font that is a bit like the engraving style. And the very first Thai official font, because government needed to get involved in this, was a book about flag signaling, and known as Tong Siam. And another early font that made its way all the way through to the present day, in fact, was designed by Assumption College, and that's why it's called Farangset, meaning foreigner. And that font comes right up today with the Narai style. Now, some of these elements here I'm borrowing from a book about typefaces in Thailand by Prachar Suiranon. He has codified quite a lot of this. Now, one of the problems about these fonts is they're very spindly. So when it came to presenting shop signs, leaflets, all kinds of printing in the early 20th century, something heavier was needed. And so this Pong-style font came into use, which you could see was being used for signage. And there's another important style, some more black letter font that was used with a kind of, I suppose, penmanship style. And the very logo of Bangkok incorporates this. On the right there, you've got this font being the style of Bangkok's Metropolitan Authority. And it's designed by a prince, and the image there is of the god Narai. Now, these fonts continued on into the 1932 revolution, where you can see them being used on posters, and then in a famous plaque that was in the ground in Bangkok that got removed recently. And one thing that's quite interesting in the recent protests was the way that the font from that inscription got reformatted to be used as a font during the protest movements in 2020. Now, into the mid-20th century, we find that those fonts have been adopted by the Thai Chinese because they were very heavily involved in a lot of presentational imagery around the country. And it was quite interesting in the way that they were trying to conform by using these traditional fonts, and yet by using bright red and gold and different color schemes, this ended up looking very Chinese. But these fonts are very prevalent around the country, and they speak of a certain era. So it's a question of fitting in, but somehow also standing out. We see a lot of handmade fonts coming in the mid-20th century. These also came through in Thai comics and in movie posters, and in a kind of retro style that is still used today. And so I was tempted in my book to use this kind of look, but it still aligns itself with a particular set of people or outlooks in the country. Another very distinctive font that you see everywhere is the newsprint font, particularly from Thai Rat. And in fact, on the way out of the presentation yesterday, I saw the one at the bottom here was hanging outside a technical college where they're using that typeface from the newspaper on their posters. And interestingly, the one, the fortune teller in the middle, is showing this in a hand-drawn way. Now, there was a big change in the mid-1970s when there was a big political crackdown in 1976, and there was a lot of state standardization. And there was a writing book that came out that every Thai knows, Mani Mana, and there's a kind of idealized village where the state institutions started to displace things like the temple as the center of life. And you can see Google marketing this by putting a looped font with the main characters from this book. But this has been spoofed recently in the protests, where you can see the classroom instruction being the political side of it coming out to the fore. You can also see this in the way that alphabet tables have been appropriated by the protest movement. These are something so ingrained, the letter of each character having a word associated with it, and these were, if you saw the talk yesterday, used in a sort of modern, updated version of how the word associations could be seen differently. So it's a way of deprogramming the way people are taught at school. This is a live question that Thai people are coming to face. Now, from that more recent period, there started to be a standardization in Thai fonts because of the digital revolution. Some of those very stylistic fonts from the 60s and 50s were disappearing because you had computer fonts, and they were emphasizing a national culture. So designers have started to question some of this by blanking out different parts of it. There was a documentary called Paradoxocracy, which obliterated the middle of those words, but somehow it's so familiar you can still read them. Another font decapitated all of those fonts by taking the loops out of them, but yet you can still read it because it's so much part of the ingrained culture. Now, coming more up to date with the hosts of this conference, presenting Western fonts with Thai script. This also presents a style that is a bit of a challenge to that way of looking at culture, that it has to have loops and so forth. But there are middle ways where you can have both looped and unlooped fonts presenting a different feel that can be utilized by different allegiances within the country. How long do I have? Okay. There are font families that are bringing in the ability to reach across borders. So this includes Burmese, Thai, and Western script. There's also a bit of a movement back towards some hand crafting. So another punk font that came out in the protest movement was removing all those beautiful loops and swirls and replacing them with crosses and devices that negate that. So we're in a point of questioning a lot of things. And there's also a kind of artistic movement towards calligraphy using black letters that is bringing out some very interesting ways of looking at typography again. This is a brand of clothing that is using a font based on this calligraphy style. And here you can see how this can be made in a kind of much more fluid way using this calligraphy style, but elements from the typography of the tattoos. So This is where I will wind up. I'm given the signal. These are some of the credits for elements that I've been highlighting, and these are the books that I have been writing in recent years about Thai popular culture. Thank you very much.